But I DNF'd. I was completely broken. I was hallucinating. Like everything was just completely out of my mind. My back had seized up. My ankles had locked up. I was just frozen and starving, and it was just the maths weren't going to work. I'm too slow. I'm not going to make it. And I rang my wife on a sad phone, like, I can't do it. I was in tears. I can't do it. I've let you down, let the kids down. I can't do it. And she said, can you do another couple of steps? I can't. She said, well, you're done. Come home. That's okay. Like, people talk about, I want to push the limits and find my boundaries and find the limit. That only happens if you fail. You have to fail to actually find where the line is. If you keep succeeding, you didn't find the line. So if you want to find your limit, you actually have to fall on your face and fail. And then you're like, oh, there's the line.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the absolutely exceptional Paul Watkins. Paul is a pharmacist, business owner, a stay-at-home dad, and a self-proclaimed nerd. He is a keynote speaker, author of the book Lost and Found: Why We Need Adventure, and winner of the 2019 6633 Arctic Ultra, referred to as the toughest, coldest, windiest footrace on the planet, a self-sufficient race over 614 kilometres in the Canadian Arctic with temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. What I personally love about this conversation is, well, a lot really. Paul and I are really like-minded, the kind of people that have more books than they do anything else, more things highlighted than is probably necessary, more notes than you know what to do with, and are more likely to find friendships in the writings of ancient philosophers and adventurers that have passed. It's this sense of growth and development that really pulls people to Paul. And it's how he takes this growth and development away from the books and continues his journey of self-exploration to the elements and some of the most extreme conditions on Earth. In this conversation, Paul shares what it means to lean into the savage within, that we are more than our job, that we are indeed the stories and experiences of our lives, and the importance of failure that led him to a winning mindset in the 6633 Arctic Ultra. And for those of you that may not make it to the end of this podcast, I want to share part of what Paul believes it means to him to be human. Go and find things that are not your job title, your business card, or your pay packet. Find things that are essentially you, that you are passionate about, and then go and write the best goddamn story that you can. I want to give a shout out to a To Be Human listener, Sandy. Sandy contacted me on Instagram sharing that she has been devouring the podcast and loving the stories, and then proceeded to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and wrote that since she started listening, she's been thinking about what she can do to challenge herself. This is such a beautiful message to receive, and only empowers me more to want to share these stories, for you all to continue to reflect on who you are, what you are capable of, and to take that next step. If you, in a similar way, have been enjoying these podcasts, learning from them, even feeling a transformation, let me know personally, and of course, leave a review. I love so much to read these messages and connect with you. Okay, I think it's time to share with you one of my absolute favourite conversations with the phenomenal Paul Watkins. Welcome to the To Be Human podcast, Paul.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. So, Paul, I read your wonderful book, Lost and Found: Why We Need Adventure. And I personally just love this book. I start the podcast off, like each episode, with a quote from people who write books. And part of the reason why I love your book so much is because you have amazing quotes all throughout your book as well. So I was like, he speaks my language. We're going to have a great conversation today. But I thought it'd be exciting.
He's one of those quote people.
He's one of those quote, I mean, there's certain types of people, and I think I can safely assume you're probably a highlighting tab type person too. So,
well, very much so.
Right, yeah. I love that stuff.
The books beside me here have got like 100 tabs sticking out of them. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm making that person.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm too. Actually, my partner said yesterday, he was describing me to a friend, and he's like, she's like the type of person that reads a book, takes notes, and then like the notes are more than the book itself. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. So anyway, Paul, I loved your book. I loved your writing. I loved your storytelling. I truly do recommend this book very genuinely to the listener. So I'd love to start off with this passage. And you said, "The point of all of this, I believe, is not to feel that the non-adventuring you is somehow less alive, but to learn how to take the light, that savage ferocity, and harness it, to bring it back with you from the edges of the world, back to civilization, and to let it light you from all the days ahead. Go out and have your adventure, but let it fill you to the brim so that when you return, all your days are alive, so that those around you, family, friends, get the most alive version of you. For they have often sacrificed too, maybe not in sweat and toil, but in their own way, so that you may go to the edges and fill your void." So I would love to ask you, Paul, in your book, you speak a lot about the savage within. So I would love for you to share your earlier days of coming to more lean into that savage within and your desire to be more.
Thanks. Good. I'm listening to that going, I must have been having a really good writing day.
Really good, yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
It's profound.
Like that. Yeah. Damn. And thank you for your kind words about the book. It's been an evolutionary process for me to understand that model of having that voice and that savage within and what it means and how it translates. I once got told that I was the least alpha male, most alpha male I've ever met. It's like my bio reads really alpha because, you climb all these mountains and do all these races and stuff. And then people meet me and they're like, "You're pretty low key. You don't come across that way." And it's like, well, for a lot of my life, I wasn't. Like I am super nerd. Like I wasn't good at sports at school or anything like that. Like I never played footy or cricket because I just wasn't good enough. Like I did cross country running because it was the only thing I could kind of coordinate myself well enough to do. And then I went into a science career. Like I was like, if you had the yearbook, it was, kid most likely to be a nerd and never leave his house. That guy, that was me. And I only got into like that opportunity of getting out and realizing that there was more to me as an outlet to kind of escape being a completely and utterly overworked human. I was in an issue where I was running my own business and I had, 60 employees, big businesses. We were running 7 days a week, 365. And I was just getting completely and utterly burnt out. I'm like, I've got to get away. Like, there's got to be more to this. This doesn't make sense to me. Like, you die with the most money, you're still dead. You don't win, you don't get a medal. Like, there's got to be more to this. And I went away and did this really basic trek in Nepal in the Himalayas. And I only chose it because I assumed that there'd be no Wi-Fi. People can't email me, you can't ring me, you can't fax me. And I'll just go away there. And I loved it. I just had time. It wasn't epically difficult. It was a really basic trek. And I came back and thought, I need to do more of that. Like I felt different. Like it was just an entirely different experience. It was outside of my realm of normalcy and my skill level and all that kind of stuff. And I came back and I went and did the Kokoda track. And I absolutely had a wonderful experience with that. And it gave me this opportunity to have this kind of created some space for me to have some perspective about what I was doing and who I was and where I was going. And that allowed me to then see some options and moving forward. And as a result of that, I ended up quitting my businesses and literally just heading off overseas doing a trek that was harder and then a climb that was a bit harder. And it just went from there to there to there. And all of a sudden I realized that for a nerdy kid with no sporting ability, I had this capacity to go do these things. And they were magical. Like you would just go into these fantastic places and you don't meet normal people doing these things. Everyone's abnormal. And they're all having this great, fantastic story about their lives. And it allowed me to see what I was capable of. As I got kind of further and further up the ladder of climbing bigger and bigger mountains and going on bigger and bigger expeditions, you suddenly realize you have quite an untapped capacity to do some pretty amazing things. And that really led me to start thinking about this concept of having this savage within. I mean, society moves so quickly. Like not from an evolutionary standpoint, but just from a societal standpoint, we've moved so fast, so quickly. And I think as humans, we just haven't caught up. It wasn't that long ago in the big time scale that we were kind of sitting in caves burning stuff. So for me, it's like, there's still that part of us that hasn't been extinguished. It says, I need to go out and feel the wind and the rain and the cold. And I need to experience that to remind yourself that you are capable finding all that stuff and thriving in all that stuff. And doing that allowed me to come home again and realize that I was more than my job. I'm not just my business card or my annual salary or my net worth or any of that. You realize I'm really diverse and I have these capacities of things that I could do that I didn't realize before. And I think when you do that, it allows you to see yourself in a whole different light. You realize that you're quite multifaceted. And that, like, kind of getting back to my quote, I felt that allows you to come home and then be more present for yourself, but then you're more present for everyone around you, because doing those expeditions, other people are helping you carry the load in terms of, training and prep and being away and what have you. But it allows you to come home and be present in ways that you may not have been able to before, or may not even realize that you could before. So my goal with that was, particularly writing the book, was really to kind of give people that window to say, you're capable of this. You need to go and put yourself in this healthy hardship and go out and face the wind and the rain and the cold and see what you can do to realize that you're so much more than your job title or your business card or whatever it is you've hung your whole identity on, if that makes sense.
It does. And I absolutely love that concept. And I know that, you speak about, you are more than just your job. We are the stories that we tell ourselves. Could you share a little bit more about that concept? Because I feel like it's certainly something that I've learned in the last few years. I would go to certain events when I was working in corporate, and even with my studying in university, it's quite ironic, really. I studied law and politics, and I feel like a large reason of why I studied this was because I really enjoyed the way that people received me when I said that I was studying law and politics. And, it's absolute bogus now, but I genuinely graduated questioning why the hell that I had studied a degree that I wasn't passionate about. And I think it had so much to do with the label and, how people would receive me because of that label. So I know that you sort of identify as a man with many hats. I would love for you to sort of share more about being more than your job and being more about the stories and experiences in our life.
Yeah, I think this is really crucial. And I think the last 18 months for a lot of people has really brought this into focus. If you lost your job in the last 18 months or your job suddenly shifted completely or what have you, if you'd attached your entire identity of who you were to that job, a lot of people found themselves at sea going, who am I now? I was that person who did that job and now that job's gone. What am I, or who am I, or am I worthy, and all those kind of things. And you realize how much you had bundled up in that. I used to play a terrible game where I'd go to functions and people ask you what you do. You meet people like, oh, hi, Paul, what do you do? And I would give different people different answers and see what they did. And I wouldn't lie, like I tell them the truth, but like you said, like I'd say I'm a pharmacist, and you could see the wheels turn and they're like, okay, I assume you've got a degree, white collar, this kind of background, you're in this kind of money, and they would unconsciously relate and speak to you in a certain way. And you meet other people and go, what do you do? And like, I drive a forklift in a warehouse, which is also true. I built the company, own the forklift and the warehouse, but I drive the forklift in the warehouse. But I just drive a forklift in the warehouse. And you see a different set of assumptions and they speak to you about different things and talk to you in a different way. And then the fun one, which I often talk about, is when people go, what do you do? I'm a stay-at-home dad, which is also true. And they get lost because they're like, that's cool. What does your wife work? Or what? You're like, they're just lost. They don't know where to put you because they're like, man, do you have a degree? Are you educated? Do you earn money? No money? Are you homeless? Like, I don't understand why you do that. Where do you fit in the whole hierarchy of society if you've got a job that has no pay packet? I don't understand. And that's always fun and interesting as well. So for me, it took me time to realize that I wasn't my job. And I often say this when I'm talking to high school kids as well. It's like, as soon as you realize that you're not your career prospect and you're not your friends and you're not your parents, you're just you. And if you have no idea who that is, that's totally okay. All that weight is lifted from you and you're free to go off and be whoever you want to be and do whatever you want to do. And if all of a sudden the ground shifts under your feet in one aspect of your life, your identity is intact. If I lost my job as a pharmacist tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, that's okay. I'm so many more things than that. Like, whereas for some people to lose, if that's the crux of who they are, if that changes, all of a sudden they find themselves kind of a little bit lost. So again, I like that idea of seeing yourself as multifaceted and capable in a broad range of things, because it just makes you more robust and hardy. When things change, you're okay. It makes you more interesting and more diverse. You get to meet different people in different areas of the world and areas of life. And I think that's fascinating. So I really think there's so much value in decoupling yourself from your business card and realizing that you're full function human being, and that's a big deal.
Absolutely. And I know that you even bring the idea of values into this. And I really loved this point in your book, because when you sort of identify yourself more with your values than your role or your job, you have so much more power, and it is so much more of a consistent experience through life, because no matter what you're doing, it's the values that you hold. How do you sort of incorporate that into your day-to-day? What are some of your values that are very true to you?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I try and express it in the manner in which I execute my day, and to kind of clarify that, like, I'm always training to do whatever race is going to come up. And for a lot of the last 18 months, I had no idea what that race was, because I just kept getting cancelled or postponed or whatever. But you do the training anyway. So I would try and express my values in the manner in which I did that training. We do the training. You have that discipline. Raining, hot, windy, sunny, 4 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night, who cares, gets it done, because that's what we do. So you execute and behave in that manner. And like for me, yes, I have multiple jobs, which I all do concurrently, but the most important job for me is my stay-at-home dad status. So for me, that value is about reflecting, how am I going? And there are days, like there were plenty of days where I get to the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, you weren't the greatest dad in the world today, pal. Like you have that honest reflection about, we could do better. Because for me, that's, I'm trying to raise 2 humans with my wife. It's like, I don't think there's a more important job than that. So I try and reflect and be honest with yourself about, how did you go? What are we going to do tomorrow that wasn't as crappy as what you did today? and try and move forward. And so I think when you have that lens of your values, the jobs that you have kind of become secondary. You can view the jobs through that lens and assess and make adjustments accordingly, versus going, your job dictating how successful you've been, you're dictating how successful you've been. I got my training done today and I did really well with it. Had a great day with the kids today and I did really well with it. Got that assignment or project or investment done or whatever, and I'm really happy with how that went. But I executed in a manner that suited my values, versus letting that job kind of dictate how and when and what and those kind of things. So it really is that juxtaposition, I think. And it takes time to get to that. And it's an ebb and flow. Like, not every day is a win. Like, you just kind of got to roll with it, but at least you have that lens and that guidepost to kind of lean into and work with.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's that element, as you're saying, of like really honest self-reflection that I think sort of obviously fuels the progression and growth. So Paul, you're very known sort of in the space of the 6633 Arctic Ultra. And I just personally am very interested in this race because I just feel like it's one of those events for me that it's just like, I feel like it'd be the world's worst nightmare. I love the deserts. I love being, in extreme heat. I do not like being extreme cold. So there is certainly something pulling towards that. But as it's known as one of the hardest races on Earth, and there's certainly reason for that. So I would love to understand more, Paul. How do you move into this space? We've been speaking about how you're a pharmacist, stay-at-home dad, you have all these different hats. How does someone like you move into the space of doing one of the hardest races on Earth?
Poor life choices is the short answer. But to expand on that, it really was an iteration. And I talked to particularly school kids about the danger of looking at someone's finished product and then evaluating yourself against that and not understanding all the lead up to that. And for those kids, I used 2 photos. I've done the Kokoda track twice. And for context, for listeners, like, that's a 96-kilometre jungle track in New Guinea, and it's hard yards. And I've done it twice, and I show them the photo of each time that I've done it. And they're 10 years apart. And the first time I look like a complete dumpster fire of a human. Like, I'm just sweat is pouring out of me. I can't carry my bag. I look like I've been annihilated. It's terrible. And the second time, I look like I'm on just walking cruisy holiday, having a ball, carrying a huge backpack. And I expressed them, like, if you look at the second photo, it's very easy to tell yourself a story that, I'd love to do that, but look at that guy. He looks happy, he's fit, he's got a big backpack. I'm like, that's a finished product. You need to understand there was 10 years of being rubbish at it before that photo was taken. And it's the same with that kind of race. I went out and did that basic trek in Nepal to get away from work because I was overworked, and loved it, and then did something a little harder and a little harder, and then did a mountain. Thought that was cool. Did something a little harder and a little harder. And then all of a sudden you're like, damn, we're climbing some of the hardest things on the planet now. This is getting like, it just kind of went with the flow. And I often tell the story that it's fine when you're a single guy. The risk reward profile is different. But then I reached a point where I got married, used to having kids, and I was on a mountain one day and I was on the sat phone to my wife going, yeah, so you're going to see some stuff on the internet. There's been some incidents. We're all okay. There's been fatalities, but our crew is fine. Everything's okay. Don't panic. Please let mum know I'm all right. And then you're like, well, how far are we taking this? Like, what are we doing here? Because you're playing with chips that aren't your own anymore. And it was that point I kind of came home and put the boots in the garage and said, well, we'll hang the Alpine boots up for a while, but you still have the hat that is you. Yes, I'm a husband. Yes, I'm a dad, and I'm a son. I'm a brother, but I'm still me, and I still have that need to go out and test myself and be in that environment. So I got back to running and did my same usual thing. You do a little run, then you do a longer run, then you do an ultra, and then you keep going. And then I saw an ad on Facebook from Outside Magazine. It was 10 toughest races in the world, which to me is like, that's just red rag to a bull. That's total clickbait. I'm definitely reading that.
I think I've clicked on that one too.
Oh, it gets me every time. And I clicked through it and I was like, and it had this race in the 66:33, and I'm reading it going, like, I read it, and then within like 90 seconds, I was like 19 Google pages deep in data about this race and who'd done it and what was the conditions like, and could we do it, and all this kind of stuff. And for me, it really ticked a couple of boxes. It was in a place I'd never been. Like, I'd been to all 7 continents at that point. I'd done a season climbing the Antarctic, but I'd never been to the Arctic Circle. I'm like, we can tick that box. And just the distance and the race really appealed to me, that I could, like, I pick these adventures not because of what they are, but where they are. I want to go to that place and have that experience in that place, versus I want to have the flashy lights that I did such and such or what have you. So I talked to my wife about it. She's ridiculous. She's like, sounds great. You're an idiot. Go for it. And I signed up. And I signed up for the 2017 race. And long story short, got DNF'd, got halfway through and got my backside handed to me on a plate, like 80% of all participants who do it. To put the race in context, it has an 80% did not finish rate. And in the first, I think, 7 years, only 11 people even made the finish line. Like, they've had years where no one finishes at all. Like, it's just 0 finishes, and that was it. So I went in 2017, trained really hard, was very disciplined, did all the right things, and just got absolutely walloped and had a disaster of a time. Made every mistake in the book. But I learned a lot out of that. And I often talk to people about the value of failure. People assume that you didn't finish it because you weren't worthy, or you're not good enough, or all those things that you tell yourself in your own cranium. And I looked at it and came home and went, well, yeah, I wasn't good enough then, but that failure gave me knowledge and experience that I didn't have before the race. I know what not to do, which is basically everything that I did. And I also have experience now. Okay, I've got a better feeling how it's going to be and how big it really is and all those kind of things. And I took a little time to kind of lick my wounds and recover physically and let my battered ego come back. And then signed up to go again, and went back in 2019, which is kind of the crux of the book of how that race then panned out in my experience, and what I learned along the way. People assume that you go to these races having figured it all out. You don't. You go to do the race so you can figure yourself out while you're out there doing it.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because there was one defining moment that I really loved reading about. And it was in the first time that you went out there, and you were sharing that you were genuinely scared to go back out into the night, and that a person there, I think his name was Tim, had kind of reached out and sort of, I think he'd said, we've got a hot chocolate and a coffee, and sort of like, let's go out together and let's do this together. I would love for you to share some of that story, because for me, it really epitomized, those defining moments that do happen in these events that truly do change the trajectory of your path and of your life.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And I tell that story quite often. Like, we got to the second checkpoint, and to put the checkpoints in context, the checkpoints in the race, they promise 2 things: shelter from the wind and hot water if the fuel hasn't frozen, they can get the stoves on, and that's it. So this is for people who haven't seen the race or read about it. Like, it's a 600 plus kilometre race. It's single stage. There's no, we do the day and we sleep the night. No, they put you on the start line and it's go. And the clock's on, and you've got 215 hours to get 614 kilometres deep into the Arctic Circle. There's no help, no support crew. You're on your own, bro. Good luck. And you have whatever you brought with you. So you're dragging a sled with your equipment, survival gear, food, and that kind of stuff. And that particular checkpoint was checkpoint 2 in 2017. And we're 114 kilometres in, and we'd survived the first night. And a third of the race had already been knocked out. Like, we'd just been battered. It was minus 40 overnight. We copped just horrendous winds. I'd made so many mistakes. It wasn't funny. Like, I was frozen. I hadn't eaten enough. I tried to sleep in the worst possible place. Like, I found the coldest, lowest point on the entire terrain. Of course, it's going to be freezing. I tried to sleep there, and that was point. And I got to that checkpoint. I'm like, I can't do it. I can't go out again. And I have this thing when I'm doing these big adventures and races where I have kind of a bit of a disassociation from myself, which I really enjoy. Kind of, there's me experiencing the race and there's me watching me experience the race. And I was looking at it, and that kind of helicopter view me said, man, you're scared shitless. You're absolutely scared to death to go back out there. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. I'm busted, and we're 114 Ks. We've got 500 Ks to go. And Tim's an Aussie too, Tim Hamlin. He's awesome. And he reached out, he said, mate, and you figured it out. Like, it's not a race. We're just here to survive. It's just a survival event about how you and how well you can survive. Let's go together. Let's keep an eye on each other as mates, and we'll move forward. And I don't know whether I would have got out of that checkpoint if it wasn't for him. And he got me out. And thank God he did, because I then got another 140 kilometres deeper into the race. Yeah, I was still being after down the track. But it gave me some knowledge and experience to really weather the storm and understand what that race was about. And I got to the 250 odd K mark before I did it. And by that stage, there were only 7 people left in the race anyway. And it's the halfway, just before the halfway mark. And already they're down to 7. But I DNF'd. I was completely broken. I was hallucinating. Like, everything was just completely out of my mind. My back had seized up. My ankles had locked up. I was just frozen and starving. And just the maths weren't going to work. I'm too slow. I'm not going to make it. And I rang my wife on a sat phone, like, I can't do it. I was in tears. I can't do it. I've let you down, let the kids down. I can't do it. And she said, can you do another couple of steps? I can't. She said, well, you're done. Come home. That's okay. Like, people talk about, I want to push the limits and find my boundaries and find the limit. That only happens if you fail. You have to fail to actually find where the line is. If you keep succeeding, you didn't find the line. So if you want to find your limit, you actually have to fall on your face and fail. And then you're like, oh, there's the line. Yeah, and I found the line. But it allowed me to then come home and reflect and go, okay, what did we learn? Everything. Okay, cool. What do we now know? And it's okay if you get to the end of that and go, you know what, I got battered and bruised and beaten and I learned a lot and I don't need to do any more. You're free to close that chapter and move on. That's entirely justifiable. But it's also okay to go, I have new tools. I have knowledge and experience. And I would like to write the next chapter, and I want to direct and star in it. So I'm going to write it, and we're going to be different to what happened in the last one. And that was the mentality I took going back to go, okay, we need to do this differently. You need to have a broader toolkit. You need to be broad scale in your mind, your mental preparation, your physical preparation, rather than preparing for what you think will happen. Prepare for everything. And then it doesn't matter what happens. You're just ready. And that was how I approached 2019. And that mindset served me so much better and allowed me to cope with all the things that then came out of 2019 and kind of allowed the story to progress as it did.
Yeah, talk to me more about that, because one of the takeaways that I took away from this part of your book was, not necessarily training exactly for the event, but to train beyond it. So you are sort of covering all those bases. How, you do speak and you do differ between mental, physical, and even emotional mindset. Can you share some of the ones that truly changed, sort of made the difference between your first attempt and then your second experience in the 6633 Arctic Ultra?
Yeah, I think part of it is when it comes to physical and mental training, like I had gone, like when I'd gone in 2017, like using the nights as an example, like racing at night in the Arctic sounds brilliant. Like the northern lights are out and you're this adventure and it's romantic and you're out in the Arctic Circle. And the reality is horrifying because it's -40 and you're getting absolutely hammered by the wind and you're alone and your entire world is literally the circle of your headlamp and that is it. And you don't know what's over there or over there. And it was terrifying. So coming back and training for 2019, I'm like, right, we need to change that narrative. Night times, we're going to thrive. That's going to be our happy place. So I did an enormous amount of my training at night in horrible hours. And it served two purposes. One was it was good training to be ready to be very comfortable in the night. And the second was I was taking time away from me, not away from my family. I mean, there was a lot of sacrificing from my family for me to be running and dragging sleds and tires and doing that. But the more I could do outside of kind of normal waking hours, I felt was a good thing as well to kind of steal from my time and not steal from my kids' time and my wife's time and do it that way. And then it was very much just getting your headspace right and getting your mentality right and understanding that hardship is good, healthy hardship is good, that you are there because you chose to be there. And that understanding that what a privilege you have to be able to go do that thing in the first place. Like, how dare you complain? You're able to go there and be in that place at that time, experience that. Don't you dare complain about it. Like, you chose to be here and you can do it. So shut up and go do it. So that put me in a much better headspace. So then when I was out in 2019 and the nights came, I knew they'd be bad and I knew they'd be horrible. And I loved it. I was ready for it and I kind of embraced it. It's just give me all you got. Let's go, because I'm going to thrive here. And the more you throw at me, the more I'm going to feel I've been getting my fully paid for experience. Right. Awesome. Let's go and bring it. And that equipped me much better. And then I think it's kind of the second part of your question is how does that equip you for the real world when you come home? It's not the training, it's how you then responded when you went out and tested your system. So I went out into the Arctic and into those nights and into that environment and was thoroughly tested. Then when you come home and you have been tested and you succeeded, you realize that you have that skill and that capacity and the training was worthwhile and it worked. And that is what I think then serves you when you're back in the real world to go, yeah, I did that. And I did the training and I executed it and I thrived and survived in it. And that makes me more than what I was before. And now I can bring that kind of new sense of me and my completeness and kind of my whole picture as a human. I can now bring that to all the other aspects of my life. But that only works if you go out and test the system. Like it's all good to have the daily practice and, you know, the discipline and all that kind of stuff. Sooner or later, you got to go test it. You got to go put yourself in the tight corners or the bottom of the well and dig and see what you got. Because that is when you learn, were you doing the right things? Did all those practices work? Were they right? Do you have the hard to quantify skills of, do you just have the guts to go and do it? Do you have the mental and emotional fortitude when the time comes? Have you got the stones? And that's why you need to go out and test that system. And then when you come back from that, then you're fully equipped, I think, to go out and do all the things of your life.
Yeah, I love the idea of, you know, with the DNFs. I personally, my first ultra marathon, I DNF'd, and it truly was the first time that I'd put myself in a situation that I truly didn't know whether I could get to the end, and I didn't. But I'm so grateful for that experience, and you know, the further I get away from it, the more I appreciate and get excited about it. Because I'm like, that was such a beautiful moment in my life to truly meet like all that I had. You know, as your wife asked you, it was like, do you have another step? And I remember asking myself the same question. I was like, you know what? No, like I don't. And there was something so liberating to be able to say, you know, this is my limit today. This is my limit. But I think I'm sure you've experienced as well, Paul, is when you have time between that moment and, you know, you've had sleep and you've had food, you can probably at times reflect and think, maybe I did have another step. Maybe I had a few more steps. And I think that's the beauty sometimes of going to complete something that is unfinished to you, because you know that when you meet that point, and I have a very similar mindset to you in that space, Paul, it's like when you get to that point where you're like, oh man, like, can I do this? Like for me now, I like say to myself, like, oh yeah, like this is when we get started. Like the minute that you're like questioning why you're here, it's like, as you said, this is what you paid for. This is exactly why you are here. This is the moment that, you know, this is why you signed up. And I think there's something so empowering to that. And I feel like it's certainly did help fuel your second experience. And I would love for you to speak more about your second experience, because obviously, you did actually go out and take the win. And I would love for you to share more about your process of thinking sort of from the start line to the end, because it's quite the evolution. It's quite the journey from when you sort of started out. And I remember you said you sort of purposely started out last and you started out slow to sort of becoming the first person to cross the line at the end. It's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah, I really went in that 2019 space. I went there and I started dead last at the start line on purpose, because I'm like, I don't care about any of you. I'm here to finish. And given that 4 out of 5 people who stand on the start line don't get to the finish line, I'm like, if I get to the finish, that's my goal. I want to finish this race. I don't care if I'm dead last. Doesn't matter. And we call them the racing snakes. The guys out the front who are going to just rip off and we'll see you later. I'm like, please wait for me. I will get there. When you've finished and you've got days to wait for me, just wait for me. I will get there. But I had a plan. I had a pace that I knew I could hold. And I had kind of a plan to get over some of the harder obstacles at the start. I mean, the first 200 kilometres, you've got to climb and get over the Richardson mountain range. After that, it's like billiard table flat until about 30 k's from the end. But the start's pretty hilly. And I had my pace. I started last. And I just did my thing being me. And I kind of just passed a few people early at the start who were doing their thing and fell in with a few people I knew and chatted to them and just executed my plan and kind of cruised along. And I was very, very disciplined about how I did things and in how I ate. Like I never stopped to eat. Like I was trying to eat like 6,000 calories a day, which is an enormous amount of food. But rather than kind of sit down and make a meal and eat it, I would eat on the run. Like I would just be charging along the sled. I could make my hot freeze-dried meal, shovel it in, clean everything, pack it, put it all away, and not break stride at all. And people are like, it's a bit serious, man. You can sit down for 10 minutes, can't you? Like, well, if you're eating 8 times a day to get enough calories in, and you sit down for 10 minutes every time, you freeze within 2 minutes. It's like an hour and a half a day. And I could be out here for 8 days. That's an enormous amount of time. I'm not that fast. I don't have that time. So I trained myself to kind of be disciplined and do that. And the same with sleeping. To give people an idea how we tackled sleep, like the clock just runs. There's no place you can sleep. The aid stations don't have sleep stations or anything like that. They're like, if you want to sleep, lie down in the snow and sleep. It's up to you. You do whatever you want. We don't care. You got 215 hours. Just do it. So I would have like a power nap in the morning of about 20 minutes, power nap in the afternoon of about 20 minutes, and I'd sleep for about 40 minutes or so in the evening. I'd try and get as deep into the night as I could, and then have your sleep. And then get up and repeat. But I was always disciplined about, it's like 90 seconds from wanting to go to sleep to being in your bag, in your little bivvy bag lying on the snow asleep is 90 seconds. And when the alarm goes off, you've got to be up and moving within 90 seconds. Now, that sounds fine at the start, but when it's day 5 and 6 and you're frozen, you're exhausted, and you're hallucinating, when that discipline kicks in to go, you've got to stick with the plan, man. It's 90 seconds, because if it's not 90 seconds, it's 2 hours. Like, it's got to be that. So I'm just executing my race plan, and I got the concept of not finishing was foreign to me. Like, I'm like, we're getting it done. Like, I don't care how bad it gets or how long it takes. We just accept that we're going to do all 614 kilometres. Make peace with that fact before you even take the first step. And then it's a lot easier to deal with rather than, can I go any further? You're going all the way, idiot. You're going to finish. So just deal with it, because we have to do it. So you can do it happy or you can do it sad, but we're still doing it. And I got to a checkpoint at Klarvik, which is checkpoint 5 out of 8. And suddenly discovered that I'd actually caught up with the lead group of 4, or the lead group of 3, and suddenly realised that they'd been kind of out the front racing, and I'd just been executing my plan of just doing my thing. And they'd been going hard, and they were pretty cooked. And I got there going, I'm doing all right here. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm in a good headspace. Physically, you're all battered and bashed, but I was still in pretty good nick, and I'd been sticking with my plan. My plan was working well. And all of a sudden, I'm like, could have a very different outcome here. Like, I remember thinking when I caught up with those guys going, you could maybe get 3rd. They're going, don't be an idiot. Why are you saying that? What are you talking about? You don't get on the podium. You don't win races, man. You just turn up and you finish them in the middle of the pack. Don't be an idiot. Don't blow like checkpoint to checkpoint, man. Slow down. But then it transpired that I ended up catching the front runners completely, and there was 4 of us, about 250 kilometres from the finish line. And we just walking in a row, and I'm like, this is it. This is the moment where everything could possibly change. And we're all friends. Like we're competitors, but we're all friends. And there was a conversation between us going, well, we need to make some decisions because we can spend the next 250 kilometres trying to kill each other and see who wins. Or we could just walk together as four, keep an eye on each other, take care of each other, and cross the line as equal first. Like, not only do we finish, you're equal first. Like, what an outcome. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't accept that deal. And for me, it was really about this concept of going home and talking to my kids about it and going, I wanted them to, when they're old enough to understand, my kids are quite young, they're 6 and 3, but I wanted them to understand that there was a time when Dad did this big race and he had a chance to go for the win, and he backed himself and he took it and he went for it. And it didn't matter what happened. I just had a chance and I had to go for it. So I took it. And if it pays out, great. If it doesn't, who cares? At least I backed myself and I didn't come home going, I wonder if. Yeah. And so I did. I had my strategy when we had that discussion going, well, it's every man for himself, was, oh, hell, it's time for me to have a sleep for 20 minutes. And they're like, we're going to leave you here we're gone, man. If you have a sleep, we're out of here. And they did that. I had my sleep for 20 minutes and they bolted it. And it took me close to 8 hours to catch him. And I caught him. And I remember it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, like pitch black. And I remember walking past them. They're in the little bitty bags having a sleep. I remember really clearly going, this is it. If you walk past them, you're first. Like, you're in front on your own. And that's it. And I'm like, either you stop now and stay with them, or we do it. And if we're doing it, we're doing it. Like, you don't look back. You never let them pass you. Like, this is it. No matter what it costs now, you can stay in front. And I said, that's it. That's the deal I'm making. And I just charged past them and kept going. And I did. I never looked back. And thankfully never let one of them pass me, even though it got real hard at the end. One of them got hypothermia and ended up getting pulled out of the race, and the 2 other guys kind of challenged on, and it came down to just myself and Patrick, one of the other competitors, towards the end. And to put it in context, by the second last night and the last night, like, was so exhausted. I think by the end of the race, I'd had 15 hours of sleep over the course of nearly 8 days. And you're hallucinating, like, everything's real. Dragons, dinosaurs, people coming out of the snow, like, you name it, it's all real. Everything's real to me. And it got to the point where, and this kind of comes back to one of your earlier questions about, testing yourself. People talk about, we do these big races to test yourself. There's testing yourself, then there's really testing yourself. Then there's the whole, when it gets hard, now we're starting, and now we really test yourself. Like, if you want to test yourself, you've got to be prepared to hurt in ways you don't understand at all, until you're really deep into that spot. And so by the end of that race, kind of, we'd done that whole thing of, the race only starts when it really starts to hurt. And we're way past that. And I got to that point where kind of, the last night before I finished, like, my body was like, dude, we're done. Like, there's nothing left here. And I was blacking out and passing out every 50 steps, just sheer exhaustion, and I'd suddenly come to and I'd be just face down in the snow. And I'd get up and get another 50 steps and just face down and get up. But in my mind, I'm going, you can't let these guys catch you. You cannot let these guys catch you. This is your one. You'll never get a chance like this again. Don't do it. And I remember as the sun was coming up, I had to keep taking my goggles off because I was crying, going, I've got this far. I've done all this training and I'm so close to the end, and my body is going to fail me, metaphorically, this close to the finish line. And I was in tears going, damn it, no, I do not accept that. I do not accept it. And I started yelling out numbers aloud to stay awake, just counting to 50 as loud as I could. Like, there's no one within miles and miles and miles of him. But if anyone had seen me, they would have thought, this man is
he's done.
He's done. But I did. And then the sun comes up and your body goes, the sun is up, or we will allow you to kind of be awake for a little while. And about 30 kilometres from the finish line, Martin, the race director, drove up to me, and he was in the support vehicle, and he pulled up and he said, hey, listen, you need to listen to me very carefully. He said, you've now been racing for 191 hours nonstop. And he said, either you're going to win it, or Patrick, the guy coming second, is going to win it. One of you is going to win, but whoever wins will win by probably a few minutes.
Wow.
So you deal with that fact as you need to, but I'm just telling you, it's going to come down to a few minutes. Do what you have to do. And he drove off, and I remember thinking, and I said it out loud. I had this conversation out loud with myself, because after 8 days, you're kind of a little crazy and you just talk out loud all the time. I'm like, how bad do you want it? Because that's it. It's like, how bad do you want it, man? Because now to win, you're gonna have to break some stuff. Like, we're gonna have to the carcass is going to get destroyed. You're just going to have to mentally drive the meat wagon over the finish line, whatever the cost. And I remember going, I don't care if I burn to the ground, as long as I'm not dead, literally, when I get to the finish line, I'll burn it. Let's go. And I ran the last 30 kilometers, and they were horrible. Like I ran like Cliff Young on a bad day. Like, it was terrible running, but I did it. And like my back seized up, and like all the muscles locked down so hard they kind of dampened down all the nerve transmission. I couldn't feel anything in my spine. And I said to the medic, like, is this normal? Like, what's wrong? He's like, no, that's normal. Like, you've been dragging a sled for 8 days. A couple of weeks, maybe a few months, you'll be fine. Like, it took 6 months before I had full feeling back in my back. Like, all the blisters on your feet explode, and your ankles are shot. Everything's broken. But I didn't care. Like, I had that opportunity, and I just bolted in and got it over the line. But it really was that that aspect of going, I went out in those elements and in that place, and I dug all the way to the bottom of the well, and then had an opportunity to win, and then went, you're going to have to keep digging, bro, and just keep digging. Like, what is left when everything is spent? And that's part of the reason I do these, or it's a lot of the reason I do these things, to go, that's a fast, like I haven't found any other way in your life where you can find that, where you can execute that equation of going, when we strip away everything, all the creature comforts, there's no help, no support, nothing at all, and we burn the wick all the way down, what's left? And that's fascinating to me, to find out what's actually there. And that's part of the reason I go and do those things, because I just haven't found another way to find that. And what you find there is fascinating. To spend that amount of time completely alone, no, you can't listen to music or have your phone or do whatever. There's no one to talk to. You generally spend 90% of the race completely alone in total silence. It's fascinating what goes on.
It's so fascinating. And I'd love to know, like, what is the self-reflection like on something like that? Because obviously when you finish and you eventually find out that you do win, as you shared, you've slept for 15 hours over 7 to 8 days, which, it's going to have you in a different headspace. So sort of over the next months, sort of what are you learning about really digging deep and like burning the wick of the candle and getting to sort of the bottom of the bottom? What are you reflecting on and learning about yourself during that time?
Yeah, a couple of interesting things with that. It's a really good question. I mean, when I flew there for the race in 2018, like I was on the flight to Canada, I got 15 hours on this flight to Vancouver. I already knew the seat that I'd booked for the flight back. Like I literally knew that it was across the aisle.
Wow.
I remember being on the flight and I looked over and the seat was empty. And I looked over that seat and went, when you're sitting in that seat in like a month's time, you'll know. All the questions will be answered and you'll know everything. And I remember then getting a flight home and sitting in that seat and just feeling that elation of going, I know. And the answer was, you were good enough. Like, you were good enough. We did it. And like having that immediate feeling, like your body's ruined, but that immediate feeling of going, we've now come in full circle and we've answered the question. The question was, can you do it? And yeah, you were good enough, and you did, and you delivered it the best way possible. When I came home, the most fascinating thing to me was, and I said this to my wife when I got home, within a day or two getting home, I'm like, everything is so loud here. Why is everyone so loud? Like, and she's like, they're talking normally. What is it? Like, no, the whole world is really loud. Like, wow. What did you people do while I was gone? It's like, it's just the dial's been really turned down for you. And I had hoped, like I'd trained and tried to, and I hadn't succeeded in training, but I tried to get to this point where I could move, but in kind of a meditative state, because I'm like, you have to get to the point where you're not thinking about anything at all, so that you can just move and not be aware of your pain or your feeling or tired, hungry, or whatever. And I did reach that point in the race, not consciously, just you get to that point where you're so alone and it's so quiet and it's so monotonous. I'd reach points and I'm like, what were you thinking about? I'm like, nothing at all. Like literally, wow. I wasn't even thinking about thinking. There was just nothing going on up there. So it allowed me to just completely decompress all that stuff. So when you get home, I think it gave me a lot of clarity. Like I did a lot of writing when I got home, because I had this great clarity around going, a lot of all this stuff in your modern life just doesn't matter. I had a lot of clarity around who I was and what I felt about things and my opinions and thoughts on things, because I felt I had a distance from them now that I could look and go, that's ridiculous, or that doesn't make sense at all. Why are you doing that? Like, why are you killing yourself at work? Or what are you doing this for? What are you doing that for? So it allowed me to reflect then, because I felt I'd achieved some kind of mental decompression, which allowed me to kind of distance myself a little bit. And then, unfortunately, you see that the deconstruction of that over time. And I think that's why people like me get itchy feet and then go, look, what else is out there that we could do? Because you're searching for that avenue again to go test yourself and then also decompress and have that experience. I think that's why some of us can't give that stuff up entirely, because we need to go through that process.
And what is the impact on your friends and family with this? Because I certainly experienced this in my own life. It's, you go out and do these such extreme adventures. And particularly for this experience for you, as you said, you went to basically the core of who you are throughout that experience, and you get back and things are overstimulating and they seem very loud, and, your perspective on life changes. And that's, a big reason why you do it. But obviously from the perspective of your wife or your children or the people around you, how do you find the integration process of coming back? Because obviously, as you even shared with the plane rides, like you're sitting in one seat, looking at another seat, knowing that you'll be different. How does that play out in your personal life? Because obviously with your wife, it's like her husband leaves a certain type of person and comes back a different type of person. How does that play out?
I don't think, I think the difference might have been greater for me than it was for them. And using my wife as an example, like, when we met, I was already kind of into this climbing journey. Like, I'd already started to do some of that stuff. So she had a really good understanding of what she was getting herself into, kind of going, he does these weird things. And she's incredibly supportive. Like, she's always said, I'll never stop him. Like, I'll never do that. But the deal is, you must come home alive, 10 fingers, 10 toes. And success is a byproduct. If you summit, finish, win, who cares? Don't care. Home alive, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Because she understands that that's kind of part of who I am and the package of, the person I am and the person she's bound herself to. So, and same for me, the flip of that script is like, I understand who she is, and like, she's a primary school principal, and her career is really important, and the teaching and the love she has for teaching and students is really important. So for me, part of my stay-at-home dad role is supporting her in that, because I've bound myself to her and I want to support her in what she does. So we kind of understand who's doing what and how that dynamic works. So for her, I think there may not have been a huge outward change for me. I came back and I was me, but maybe a little deeper me than I was before. And she often jokes that I'm the extrovert who doesn't like people. I'm quite happy as an introvert as much as I'm as an extrovert. So for me, it was probably I just turned the dial down. Like, the pandemic hits and everyone gets locked up. I'm like, this is cool. Yeah. Like, I'm okay with like just going, like, we live out on some land, and I'm like, we're fine out here. If the zombie apocalypse came, I'm okay with that. Like, it's okay. So I think for me, it was maybe, it just amplified a little bit of the stuff that for the people who knew me really well, it was no surprise. I just found it was maybe a deeper hue than what it had been before. And then, of course, it does open doors, though. Going and doing a race like that and winning a race like that opens doors. And then that gave me the opportunity. I'd always done public speaking from my mountaineering days. I've had mountaineering expeditions that went really well and ones that have gone really badly. And so I would talk about that in the same context, not look at me climbing a mountain, but I went out and failed and learnt a lot. And this is why you're going to fail, and you'll learn a lot too, and that'll be okay. And this just allowed me to kind of expand that story and deepen my understanding of what that meant and what the drivers were and how that might affect other people. And kind of, you get a bit older and you experience a bit more, and you can have a better story around how that fits, because you understand the world a bit better, and you have kids, you understand things a bit better and that kind of stuff. So I think it was more a case of, it just allowed me to go a little deeper on the stuff that was already there anyway. And then kind of go out and deliver that to other people. And that's probably the part that I enjoy the most, of going out and sharing that story, but more importantly, sharing the lessons learned. The story is really handy. I hate your 5-point list of how not to fail or how to be successful or whatever. I'm like, people are going to forget that the second you walk out. But if you give them an amazing story of the time you got stuck in the Arctic, or you're climbing this mountain in South America, or you're in the Antarctic or whatever, people live that, and they take that story away with them, and they put themselves in it, and they ask themselves questions about it. And then they can take the the nuggets out of that story and the lessons and the learnings out of that story and take it with them and kind of start to use it themselves. What was point 3 on the plan that I'm meant to do every morning before 8 a.m.? It's like, it doesn't work that way. So I think for me, it's just allowed me to kind of expand on something I was doing already.
And I know that, as you shared, you used your children as leverage in achieving what you achieved in your second race. And I know that the lessons are so important for you to teach them. What is significant about any of your stories in your life? Like, what are the primary stories that you would love for your children to truly learn from?
I think it's a really concept of being somewhat underfunded. I like that I do a lot of things on paper do. Nerdy pharmacist kids with no sporting ability shouldn't climb big mountains and win big races. Dads who are people who I've had big businesses and big investment portfolios and all that kind of stuff, don't typically just throw it all away and go, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad. But I love it. So it's like, you don't have to follow the rules. You need to follow yourself. And if you're doing something that the crowd isn't okay with or doesn't fit the norms, that doesn't mean you're wrong or you're not worthy or you failed or whatever. It just means they don't see something that you do or you love something that they don't. And that's okay. And, that I've failed a heap of times doing these things before I got any good at them at all. And that's okay as well. So I don't want to get into the hard and fast of the rules they must have or whatever. I want them to be, I want you to be an independent thinker. I want you to be a critical thinker. And I want you to have, that strength of character to go, I want to do this. And I did it for 10 years and I changed my mind and I went and did that. And I did that for 10 years and then I learned a new skill and now I do that. That's great. That's perfect. There was a time when I envied people who had spent their whole life doing one thing and become just so masterful at that one thing, and their knowledge was so deep on that one thing. And I was like, I change my mind every decade, have an entirely new career. Look at these, I'll never be a master of anything. But then you reach a point in your life where you go, wow, I've done so much stuff in so many different fields. That's fantastic. You can stick me in a room with medical people and I understand them. You can stick me in a room with teachers and I can have a conversation with them. You can stick me in a room with people who run warehouses and drive forklifts and drive trucks and I get them and understand them. I spent a couple of years working as a chippy, building houses. We can talk about that. We can talk about investment stuff. Probably it's allowed me to relate and talk to a lot of people and be comfortable in doing that. And I think that just makes you a more interesting human. And I think that's a really good thing. So as I said, for them, I want them to see the broad scope picture of think for yourself, be critical when you think about those things, and give yourself the freedom to go do stuff. Mm-hmm. If it works, great, and you love it, do it. And if you pick one thing and you want to be that for the rest of your life and you're fantastic at it, do it. But if you change your mind in 10 years and want to do something else, that's okay too. As long as you're doing it for you and you're not doing it because I need the title or I need the money, the business card, the whatever. One of the things I do when I'm looking at these races and expeditions, I have 2 rules about selecting them. One is you can't tell anyone for 30 days if you have that initial idea, you can't tell anyone. So you've got to let it kind of roll around the grey matter. And if you don't think about it that much, it's really not that important. But if you think about it every single day, you really want to do it. And the other little rule is if you could do it, but you can never tell anyone and no one can ever know that you did it, do you still want to do it?
Love it.
And if the answer is yes, you're doing it for the right reason. Because I think that boils down to are you doing it for you or are you doing it for the you that wants other people to know that you did it?
Right.
Because that's a very different person. And when the chips are down and it's all going horribly wrong and you're hallucinating and frozen in the Arctic, you'll probably throw the towel in if you're doing it for other people. If you're doing it for you or your kids, or, those things are really the crux of who you are, you won't throw that towel in for love and money. You'll go to the end no matter what. So I think those things are really important. I think I got a roundabout answer there to your question. But
I just think it's so important, and I love that it's so significant in your family because you see, we actually spoke about this before pressing record. You see the pressures these days on children having to make up their minds on what they have to do for the rest of their life, and it just doesn't seem to work that way. And we make these big decisions very early in life, and they're just they're going to change, and there's completely no shame in that. And it's just actually really beautiful to explore who you are and what you want to do. And I think particularly in our society, it's such a privilege to be able to do that, to be able to switch up things and try new things. And yeah, I just think it's so important to be comfortable. And even for the older generations that have been brought up on more of that traditional sense of, stay with your one job for the rest of your life, I think there's no limit on what age you can really decide to lean into something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm very conscious of as well of going. It's really easy for me, the white academic scholarship from the private boys' school kid to go. I went out and did all these things. It's like I've had the opportunity to do them. I've worked really hard to give myself those opportunities, like really hard, but I've still had those opportunities. But it's also then allowed me to understand that you are fortunate enough. Yes, you worked hard to get there, but you still have had the opportunity to get there. Don't waste that. Don't bin it for bad reasons or poor reasons or just a lack of intestinal fortitude or whatever it is. You're here, you're lucky enough to be here, you worked hard to be here, you got to maximize that opportunity and go for it. So I'm conscious of being fortunate enough to do it. I'm conscious of how much work I did to maximize and leverage all of that. And then you kind of put those two together to make sure that you don't waste any of those opportunities at all.
And what does life look like for you now, Paul? Because obviously, you've done several things after this Arctic Ultra, but I'm always so fascinated with people that do, some of the hardest events on Earth. How does this play out for you? Do you try and go bigger and better, or you just try and explore as it seems you're quite passionate about exploring just different types, places in the world really over anything? What does your future look like in this space of endurance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's I've talked about this before with people, there's a huge pressure when you get home of what's the next thing. Everyone asks that, what are you doing next? So there's a huge pressure that it has to be bigger and better than the last thing. And finishing that race, a lot of doors opened up to go do some very crazy, like, wow things. And I was very tempted. But then there was that whole, you have the discipline to fall back to your rules. And some of them, it was a case of going, you'd be doing that because you want to tell people you did that.
Right.
Not because you need to do it. And therefore the time, the sacrifice, your sacrifice, sacrifice of other people, is that really worth it? Can you justify that? No, not at this point. Okay, well, you shelve that. No matter how tempting and fantastic and crazy it is and how wonderful it'll be for your career if you can pull it off or whatever, you're not doing it for the right reason, so we're not doing it. We might do it down the track, but who knows? So for me, it was kind of, let's come back and give yourself some time to explore that. Obviously, having a kids too, it was kind of like I committed to being a stay-at-home dad and spending some time doing that and really enjoying that. So it's a case of you don't have to do the next big thing straight away. You can actually go, my next big thing is being a stay-at-home dad for a while, for a couple of years. Right. And that's a big thing.
Yeah,
that's I love my kids, but that's no walk in the park, man. Like, it's a big thing. So, like, part of it was doing that and then doing your speaking and that kind of stuff. Obviously, the pandemic kicked a lot of that in the butt, so a lot of that got put on hold, as did a lot of racing. I'm just like, I'm going to get some big races locally, like in Australia under my belt. I had some overseas stuff I would have loved to have done, but of course, all that gets nixed. So it's a case of going, okay, well, we're here. Where are we? I'm here, and I can't get overseas, so I'm not doing anything for a while. Okay, well, let's do some stuff that we can do. There are amazing races in Australia. Go do some of that, relish and make sure we do a damn good job of helping raise your kids. And let's just see what comes up next and see what that is. So some of that's been some business stuff. Some of it's just been making sure that I'm kind of race ready to see whatever comes up. And when the world opens up and we're allowed to go do stuff, we'll definitely go do stuff. And it's just a case of going, you don't have to decide now. You can kind of see what bubbles up and what do you want to do, and we'll kind of take it from there. There will be things. What they're going to be, I don't know yet, which is kind of nice. I've got a few ideas, but by the same token, it's that thing of going, let's just work through what we're doing now. Let's get the world back to a little bit of normal. And then we'll see what comes up. There'll be things.
There'll definitely be things.
There's always, as my mum's like, there's something. There's always something. You're always thinking about something. Like, well, yes. I am always thinking about something. I'm sorry.
It's always simmering.
There'll always be something. It'll be a thing. We'll do a thing. But, we'll let that thing come to us when it's ready to come to me or where I'm ready to go to it. And then, because you're doing it for all the right reasons, we'll go hammer and tong, and it'll be a great experience. And if it's next week or 5 years from now, that's when it'll happen.
And I truly honor you for sticking with so much integrity to your rules, because I think it is quite difficult in this space. Obviously, there is people really look up to people like you that have succeeded in such difficult things. And you do see it with certain types of people that get kind of caught up and carried away in that. But I think, as you're sort of saying, if you're not in it for yourself, it truly does show up in the most challenging of moments. So it's certainly going to be a takeaway for me. I really love the way of deciding what things to do through that. So Paul, I really appreciate having this beautiful conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it. And as I shared at the start of this conversation, I truly loved your book as well. And I'm not just saying that. I really loved it. And you had a lot of really good writing moments in there. And it was a really beautiful read. And I think, it wasn't just about the adventure. There was a lot of sort of self-reflection on different concepts that I really enjoyed as well. And some of them were new concepts that I hadn't thought about and had me sort of thinking, I'd like to look more into that, which I really appreciate from books. So yeah, just thank you so much, Paul.
My pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So on a final note, Paul, I'd love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
I knew you could ask me that because I listened to previous podcasts. And the question was going. Because some people always have their top 5 questions and you're not prepared. And you're like, I'm going to think on the spot. What the hell am I going to say?
I actually tried just catching you out, so that failed.
Right. Planned. What is it?
I normally tell people before and they you can see they're panicking all the way through trying to answer it. So
yeah, go try. I've got to say something really clever.
Change tactic.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting though, in all honesty, when I've heard you ask that question in other podcasts, and the thing that came to me was actually a quote by Walt Whitman from one of his poems that said, the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. Beautiful. And for me, that really resonates. It's really, for me, what it is to be human. It's I think it's 1 in 400 million of the odds of you being you here now as you are. So what an opportunity. Don't waste it. Go out and live your life to the best capacity you can be and have your story to tell. Go out and have your adventure. And it doesn't have to be climbing Everest. You don't have to win some race in the Arctic. My mum was a stay-at-home mum and she raised 2 boys who have gone on to be both very successful. So I'm like, that's tick, that's huge. You did something amazing. It doesn't have to be some crazy adventure, but it has to be something that's important to you, that you're passionate about, and then pour yourself into it and write the best damn story about your life that you can in that aspect of your life. So for me, to be human, it really is about finding those things that are not your job title or your business card or your pay packer in, but the things that are quintessentially you, that you're passionate about, and then just go write the best damn story you can. That's to me, that's what the deal is.